Hi, I'm John Riley. I'm here for Northampton Community Television. We're going to be filming here on the Smith College campus. We've been invited into the archives, the rare books, and the Sophia Smith collection to see exactly what is hidden away here in the library. It's something that usually scholars and students get to see, faculty, but the library is looking forward to opening this up more to the public, more to people that live here in Northampton. And we're going to give you a sneak preview of some of the treasures that are here in the archive. We're going to be meeting with Elisabeth Meyers, the director of the Rare Book Collection, today. We'll be interviewing her in just a couple minutes, and then we're going to get to see some of the treasures here in the archives. Before we go in, I wanted to show you a picture of what Nielsen is going to look like when they're finished. They've kept the facade and the structure of the old Nielsen Library and have added on 2 new wings. It's been designed by Maya Lin, who designed the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. It's going to be a real showcase here on the campus and in Northampton. One of the most interesting things, I think, for our shoot today is that when this is done, the centerpiece of this library is going to be the archives, the rare books, and the Sophia Smith collection. It'll be a real jewel case for that collection. I'm here with Elisabeth Meyers, who's the director of the special collections here at Smith College. She's been gracious enough to allow us to come in and film here in the archives. Archives have always been considered kind of a locked away, secret place in a library. And I think you're looking to make them more available. Is that so? Have more hands-on, allow public students more access to the archives.
That's true. We're a public facility, even though we're housed on the Smith campus, and we do support the teaching mission of the college. In fact, we're very much intertwined with the mission of the college, but we are a public facility and we serve researchers from the Northampton community, including students K through 12, as well as just community members who are interested in various types of history. I mean, really, it's the story of Northampton becomes the story of Smith. The story of Smith is a part of the story of Northampton. These 2 things are linked, and we also host researchers from around the world. So from the new to the process to those more advanced scholars.
It's interesting to hear that. I hadn't thought of it as like a place for Northampton history, but it really is. The history of the college is a history of Northampton as well.
Yes.
But I was visiting here a few weeks ago, and I was in your reference room, and there were people from all over the world. There were French students studying. You really have to walk 2 paths there, local and international at the same time, but like the college itself. Now, how is it that archives and rare books have become so important to libraries? They used to be, like I said earlier, the dusty, hidden away part of the library. Now they're kind of the centerpiece, and they will be more the centerpiece in Nielsen too.
That's true. I think the purpose of archives, manuscripts, and rare books hasn't really changed, but the way that the institutions or the institutions that hold them or the individuals who use them think about them has changed. These primary sources, these original materials, they form the evidence. They stand for a truth. They're not the interpreted version, as you might find with a secondary, like a published history source. So, the real advantage is that we have individuals who come in and they want to look for themselves. They're critically engaged with the documents or the books or the objects, and they're able to come to their own conclusions and to seek a kind of truth that secondary materials are someone else's truth. Right? They did the research. They've presented an idea. But the archives are the archives. It's the real deal. So I think in that way, archives have always had that function, whether it was for the state or for the church or for academic institutions or governments, and increasingly companies or corporations, this idea that we have to document ourselves, we have to understand, very transactional things like the exchange of property or the births and death records, but special collections are increasingly about the narrative of how people lived, not just just the facts, right? So the diaries, the letters, the way in which people experienced their life and their challenges and their opportunities, all of that exists in the archives. It's the stories, the narratives. So because of that, for a long time, because, we joke and we say, well, archives are special, but we're not special. And part of that is because people tend to think of it, again, as the dusty, dark, locked away, very secretive. You have to know somebody, you have to get permission. And it's true, coming into a special collections and using material isn't the same as a library. But, and that's partly because we just want to make sure those records are there for users in perpetuity, right? Or at least as long as we can envision in perpetuity.
Sure.
But archivists and librarians and curators have really, in the last 20 years, pivoted around the idea of being gatekeepers to being gateways. And, if the goal of a special collections is just to store material, to preserve it for future generations in the abstract, you'd save a lot more money, certainly in labor, if you just put it in a maintained attic and hoped for the best. We're all about access and use, and I think that's true across the profession.
I think that's great, and that's one of the main reasons that we're here, is to let people know that, and to let the citizens here in Northampton know that this is available to them to access, and the librarians here are very helpful at helping you find the things that you may be looking for.
Which is a great point. I think people sometimes also get intimidated by special collections in the sense that it's not like a book you look up in a catalog and it's there. You look up on Amazon, you get all this information about it, and you have a very clear way of using it and accessing it. Whereas you come to special collections, it's a little bit different. It can be intimidating, but I think we're working every day to make sure that anyone of any age, for any purpose, can come in here and use the material.
Now, when you talk about archives, you're talking about the past, but you're also talking about the future, because you're talking about collecting, and what you're buying, what you're getting donated, what you're looking for. How are you looking to grow the archives? What areas are you looking to expand? You'd use the term, where are the silences? I really like that. Where are you looking to grow the archives in the collection?
Great question, and in fact we're undergoing a collection development review process right now, which is a healthy way of taking a look at where are the collection strengths and where are the weaknesses, where are the silences, who have we not captured in the record, who have we captured enough of in terms of their voice or their story. So that's a process we're doing, and it takes a while. It takes some months to get through to really do it deliberately. I can tell you that historically there are three collections that make up Smith College Special Collections. Okay. There's the College Archives, which does exactly what you'd expect. It really documents the intellectual life, but also the life of students, administrators, really the life of the campus, going back to and even a little before its founding. Then you have the Mortimer Rare Book Collection, which is a wonderful teaching collection that is very diverse in its subject matter because it was built to be a teaching collection. We have strengths, of course, and we're probably most well known for having one of the most comprehensive Sylvia Plath collections, but there are many others as well. And again, it's very diverse. So we have from cuneiform tablets up to contemporary artist books. So really thousands of years of sort of human intellectual creation.
Like you say, a teaching collection.
Very much a teaching collection.
And you do like your students to be hands-on with this stuff.
Absolutely. Unless you're using photographs, then we don't want you to have gloves on. Yeah. We want you to have the tactile interaction with the material. And in fact, recent research has shown that wearing gloves using materials can be damaging because you lose that ability to connect.
Do you make people wash their hands before they touch things?
We don't even do that. We just ask you to keep the food and the liquids out.
That's important. It's very important.
Very important. Some baseline, but again, if we're not collecting it to be used, we shouldn't really be collecting it.
Well, I think people are doing so much with like the antibacterial stuff that their hands are probably very clean when they come here.
I hope so.
Now, speaking of touching, you have concentrations in archives and book studies for your students. I'm very interested in that because not a lot of colleges do that. How is that what do they do?
So the concentrations as a whole have been at Smith, not even 10 years, I think. I'd have to look into which is the oldest. But there are several across campus, and they were part of an initiative of the Office of the Provost, and it was really to create ways for students to not just gain the theoretical context, but also understand the real experiential component of working with materials. So with rare books and archives and special collections, there's certainly that piece of understanding how do archives get used in research, how do you mine documents for information, how do you do interpretation of photographs, but also then how do you actually manage an archive, how do you make choices about what you pay for and what you don't.
So these students could go on to be historians or possibly even librarians.
For sure.
A lot of opportunities there. It's very interesting to see people studying books and archives now. So I'm very interested in that. Beth, you've told us about the rare books and the college archives. The third part of the equation of your collections is the Sophia Smith collections. What is that? How does that fit into your archives and your rare books?
So the Sophia Smith collection is really the Sophia Smith collection of women's history. It is the oldest collection of women's history in the country and second oldest in the world.
Wow.
And we are among one of the largest collections. When it was first founded, which is really very early in the early 1940s, along this at the time a very radical, almost activist idea that while there were archives that were collecting many men, women were not seen as particularly valuable, or their records were not seen as valuable. So Smith College, being Smith College, decided to create a repository where those records could come and have a home and be safe and stewarded. So the early collection focused on suffrage and abolition, those incredible families where, for example, in the Garrison family or the Hale family, you have many of the men have been collected and by other institutions, but the women, the sisters, mothers, aunts, grandmothers, they had not. And so we were able to really, again, sort of step in and save that history. And we also, in the Sophia Smith collection, started very early collecting around women's reproduction and women's reproductive health and justice. So we have an incredible collection from before Margaret Sanger, including Margaret Sanger, through Planned Parenthood records here, and we're very excited about that. But we also collect around women's reproductive health, justice, and well-being, women of color, women from different parts of the country, not just the big national organizations and the more famous, but also those who are really doing community and grassroots activism on behalf of women. So it's a wonderful collection, and it's one, I think, that brings people here by the hundreds and hundreds every year, and it's one that we continue to seek to grow.
Seems like a very unique collection, and how does that fit in then to the archives and the rare books? Are these three separate collections, or do they kind of all go together? How does that fit?
So they each have their own collecting scope, but we are housed together. So we're co-located, and operationally we're together. The curators and archivists who steward those collections work very closely together, doing teaching and outreach into the community, various communities, as well as working with donors. So there are some overlaps. We're a very clear Venn diagram in terms of content, because you can't, even the college archives is really the story of women's education here, and it has the story of race, and it has the story of immigration, and so there is a lot of overlap between the three, but they are distinctive. Looking down the road as we look at our collection development and we're looking to fill those silences, there are areas to grow in, and I think that certainly for the Rare Book Room we're thinking about how do we collect out of a non-Western tradition. What if we are looking to South America or to Asia? For the Sophia Smith collection, there are still many women who are not being documented. For example, around women's prison experiences and the shackling movement, women in disability issues, women in the internet and technology. Trans women, of course. So we're thinking really about sort of who's out there, who's not being documented, or who can we help to document. Certainly there's no place can collect it all. And manage it. So we're really sort of not wanting to compete, but wanting to make sure that we're giving as complete of history as we can of women.
I can see how that fits into your whole collection, and it really makes the whole collection even more exciting than what we've been talking about. I'm going to give you a couple more phrases that I'm quoting you on, and I just will run these by you. Information as activism. What did you mean when you said that?
Again, it goes back to the idea of archives and rare books, manuscripts of having evidentiary value. And so when people are seeking a kind of where did I come from, they really want to put themselves in the context of the past. It's not as easy, you hear the phrase like we learn from the past so we don't repeat in the future, but of course we repeat things constantly, but that doesn't mean that the past doesn't have a way for us to know ourselves, to know our community, to know our place, to find place. And I think for those groups, especially this archives, this special collection, for those groups who have been left out of the historical record for a very long time, have been underrepresented, who have been silenced, the mere act of representation, of being able to find themselves, matters. It matters a great deal, and that itself becomes a type of activism. The other side of that is that we work with women activists and women's organizations who are working in activism. And so we are the repository for many of those women. And we work with them as they're going nuts. So if they're working on a campaign, they want to counter a political point, or they're putting together a march, or they want to, whatever it is, we can help provide them with materials that support that work. And so we're very much a living, breathing, contemporary place, despite being focused on the past.
And to close out our interview today, I wanted to ask you one last question. You used this phrase too, we're all digital archivists now, kind of showing how archives are changing and how books are changing, that so much of it is online. Are you doing a lot of digitizing of your archives? Is that a big part of what you do?
There's sort of two ways to think about electronic records. One of them is that you want to digitize, you want to migrate material from its fixed form into a digital form. And the other is that increasingly people are working they're only working in digital. They're only working in Google Docs. Their social media life is very vibrant.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
And so how do we capture that? How do we make it accessible long
Born
into the
digital,
future?
yeah.
So yes, the answer to that question is yes, both. I mean, I think, so at its core, this is a time in archives, special collections, and libraries in which we're sitting at a kind of center, a nexus, a kind of coming together point between many different professions and groups of people who are all wrestling with what does it mean to manage cultural information in the 21st century. So that has to involve people who understand content. It has to involve also people who understand the technology. And this coming together of staff, of people who are just interested in wrestling with these questions. How do you preserve an email? What does it look like? What's the structure of that? How do you provide access to it? How do we think about privacy and copyright in an open web environment? How do we honor our donors and stewardship the records ethically? So it's a really, I think it's actually really just an amazing time to be in this field. And I'm grateful every day for my colleagues who challenge my thinking and assumptions that I make about how people exchange knowledge, build knowledge and exchange information.
Well, it sounds like the college and the library have made a very good decision to make you the centerpiece of Nielsen too.
Yes, and that's special collections, not me literally.
I meant you as the institution.
Me as the institution, yes, absolutely. In fact, it's one of the reasons I came to Smith is that I do believe it's on the forefront. It's very much on the forward edge of thinking about special collections as being part of what makes an educational higher ed different, what makes it special. The collections here are unprecedented for in size, scope, and the staff that support it than any Oberlin group college. And we can certainly compare ourselves to some of the best research one-level universities, because Smith has decided this is where it wants to put its time, energy, and effort and support. So I'm grateful for that every day.
Well, it's really going to be a great addition to the library, to the college, and to the town of Northampton. We're really looking forward to seeing it.
The new building.
Seeing it
Yeah,
all
we
come
are
together.
all looking forward to
All come
seeing
together.
it all coming together.
Great. Well,
Yes,
thanks a lot, Elizabeth.
Sure. Thank you.
Appreciate your time. So you guys are known as the stewards. That's how you were introduced to me. What does steward mean? What do you do as a steward?
Yeah, I think it's a term that encompasses a lot of the things that we have in common with our job. Nancy and I are archivists, which means we work with unique and rare records, and Shannon is a curator of rare books. But for all of us at Smith College, we bring in new collections. We take care of the collections we have and think about their long-term accessibility. And we also do teaching with students in the Smith College and 5 colleges in the larger area.
So it's sort of it's a good term to think of sort of the full range of what we do in terms of the stewardship of the collections across time, and caring for but making them available, and bringing in new materials that are in conversation with what we already have as well.
And I think that over time the term curator has sort of gives it this lofty sense, and also the sense of this is my domain and you're not allowed particularly to be here, whereas steward is much more open and really reflects the way that archives and special collections have changed significantly over time.
Now, you each have a separate specialty that you work in. What is yours, Maureen?
So I work with the Sophia Smith Collection of Women's History. We are a 77-year-old repository, and we're actually one of the first places on the whole world that had this idea that women as a group have contributions to make to the world, and they've created documentation of those contributions and that we can learn from them. So the Sophia Smith Collection started by collecting suffragists and abolitionists who had a lot of stuff in their attics, and people wanted to make sure that it ended up here. Over time, the Sophia Smith Collection has expanded to talk about the ways that women are changing the world. We're particularly strong on thinking about access to healthcare, particularly reproductive health, access to abortion, making sure that women can live the lives they want and contribute to the families in the way that works best for them.
That sounds great. It sounds like you're really personally involved in this too, which is what I really like hearing that. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. I mean, the best thing about my job is the way we get records is we talk to people. So every day I get to talk to people who are truly changing the world on behalf of women and other gender minorities, and that's such a privilege.
It's really, really cool. And Shannon, what is your specialty? What do you
Yeah,
do?
so I'm the curator of the Mortimer Rare Book Collection.
Oh, what a privilege that is.
It
That's
is.
really cool.
It
And you're
is.
fairly new, aren't
I'm
you?
fairly new. I've been here a year, and it's named after Ruth Mortimer, who is a really important member of the Smith community. She is a Smithy herself, and also came back to work at Smith and really opened up the rare book collections to the students to make sure that they understood that this was their collection and this is something they could learn from. So it wouldn't just be something that was behind closed doors that maybe certain privileged faculty could access, but that students had access to historical and cultural materials in a really meaningful way. So it's really wonderful to have her name associated with the collection. It used to be known as the Mortimer Rare Book Room, so now we're the Mortimer Rare Book Collection. Unlike the Sophia Smith Collection and college archives, the Mortimer Rare Book Collection is much more about being a teaching collection. So rather than being having the more depth in terms of women's history and activism, we're more broad. So we investigate what can we contribute to the curriculum at Smith. So working with faculty, working with students to bring in materials that can supplement and enrich the curriculum is really a big part of what we're doing. We have a ton of materials related to literature, American and English literature in particular, and lots of first editions of various texts, and also texts over time, so you can see different editions and how they change, and how certain representations and designs can shift our perceptions and our engagement with a particular single text. Can be really interesting to investigate. We're currently working on further diversifying our collection, bringing in more East Asian and Middle Eastern and Latin American materials, African American materials, African diasporic materials as well. So I'm really, I feel very excited to be here at this moment and bringing this incredible collection that really is so phenomenal for a college. I don't know of any other college in this country. I mean, research university, sure, but any college in this country that has such a rich collection as we have here that we can share with Smith students and other students in the 5 colleges, as Maureen noted. So it's an absolute privilege to be here, and I learn something every day from the students, from my colleagues, from the materials that for me always tell a story. So I'm really glad to be here.
That's great. Is there any particular area that you're interested in as far as rare books go?
Yeah, so I'm especially interested in the intersection between the history of the book and the history of science. So looking at how the natural world was sort of explored, investigated, documented, and disseminated. So it could be something like going on a mission to another part of the world and documenting specific types of foliage or animal life, and bringing that back and conveying that to the person who traveled would have to convey that to the writer, to an engraver, and a publisher, get that out into the world, and then seeing how people would share their books with others. So I'm also interested in marks of use, annotations, so accreting knowledge onto a particular object over time. And you can often find women in various contexts there as well. They might have been printers, they might have been binders, they might have been reading these texts and sharing their thoughts. So even though you might think that women are not a part of certain historical moments, especially as manifested in rare book collections, they're in fact there. We just have to find them in different ways.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Nancy, what is your
So I'm the college archivist, and my responsibility is to collect, what I like to say, document the life of the college. So we do that by collecting materials that relate to the administrative offices, various deans of faculty and student life. We collect faculty papers because we're trying to reflect what teaching went on at Smith since its beginning. But really the most fabulous piece of the College Archives collection, and the one that I like the most and gets a lot of attention, is our collection of undergraduate materials. So we have letters, journals, diaries, photograph albums, scrapbooks.
Before they all become famous.
Before they all become famous, and mostly the unfamous ones. But the letters and photos are a way to understand what it was like to be an undergraduate at the time, any given time in Smith's history. And I think Smith is very unique in that way. A lot of other colleges and universities will have traditional administrative materials, office materials, but the depth of our undergraduate materials is significant.
Well, Northampton, speaking for Northampton Community Television, we really appreciate all of you telling us about what you have, and we're going to take a look at them in a second, to let the citizens and people here living in Northampton know that this exists and that they can come here and share it too. I think that's really
Definitely.
a hidden gem that people don't know enough about.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Yes, we are open to everybody. We're open to the public, and we really hope that if folks have an interest, a research interest, if they want to know about women's history or rare books or the history of Smith College and how they've intersected with that, that they'll come here and that they'll use our materials in our reading room.
And one of the things that Beth and I were talking about earlier is you aren't on your own if you come here looking for stuff. You're here to help them find it. You're here to help them do some of the research that they may want to do. So it's not just somebody wondering, and it's like, I'm lost, I don't know where everything is. They're going to get a hand.
Yeah, our reading room is open to the public, as Maureen noted, and you don't need to make an appointment. You can just show up and say, you know, I'm interested in seeing a letter written by Sylvia Plath, or I'm interested in learning more about women's activism around Native American experience. And we can help you locate specific materials that could be of interest to you. So it's really nice to just say, you can come in. You don't need to make an appointment. You don't even need to know specifically what you're looking for. We can help you. Our reading room is open to everyone. We're in a temporary location for a few years while the Nielsen Library is being renovated, but our colleagues in the libraries more generally can help guide you to our reading room if it's a little confusing to find it on your own.
I think that's
And we
great.
hope that everyone will come in.
I think
Yeah.
people don't really realize that. So thanks. Let's see what you have. You're going to show us some of your treasures.
So, you know, you asked me to pick some of my favorite objects, and that's a really hard thing to do because I think what's so powerful about archives are the ways that they interact with one another and that they tell bigger stories. So I'm going to show you two objects that I really, really love and let you know that there's a lot more where this came from. So this is a diary of Martha Coffin Wright. Martha Coffin Wright is a suffragist. She helped organize the Seneca Falls Women's Convention in 1848. And something that I really love about this diary is that it's documentation of her friendships and her family and her networks. And so she writes every day about what she's done and who she's encountered. And here, something you can see is that her friend Harriet Tubman came and visited with her. Miriam Coffin Wright's daughter is Ellen Wright Garrison, and this is her book here. We call it the Hair Book. Ellen Wright Garrison was the daughter-in-law of William Lloyd Garrison. William Lloyd Garrison is an abolitionist. He had a newspaper called The Liberator. He's pretty well known in abolitionist circles. And something that I really like to think about here is the role of women in these abolitionist movements and in the movements after abolition of freedmen's rights and thinking about the rights of Chinese immigrants, of women's roles and women's networks. And so when you first look at this book, you think, what is going on here? Because what you see is hair, and it's a little bit creepy. Sometimes when I show this to students, they kind of want to go on the other side of the room. Others of them want to get really close. And so this comes out of this Victorian habit of collecting locks of hair. Something to remember is that hair doesn't decompose, right? And so that it keeps a lot of the attributes of the living person who had it on her head. And so you would collect a lock of your friend's hair, perhaps because you didn't know the next time you would see them. Traveling to visit other folks took a long time. This is from the records of the Third World Women's Alliance, and the Third World Women's Alliance formed in Oakland, California. A lot of folks who came out of the civil rights movement. This was a black-led women's movement, and they were in reaction to both the patriarchy of the civil rights movement and the racism of the mainstream women's liberation movement. And I really love this collection because this is a collection of folks who were all volunteers and who self-documented themselves so much. So you can see in the larger collection minutes of meetings, extensive documentation of what they were up to. They had self-education committees because there was this idea of there can be no movement unless you really know your history. So there would be committees of folks who learned the history of African American women, of women in other parts of the world. And these are documents of a campaign that they had done called the Coalition Against Infant Mortality. And this was sort of based on an understanding of a particular hospital in Oakland, California was showing that the infant mortality rates for the babies of black women were much higher than the infant mortality rates of other women. And this was, you can see here, in black and white, what the campaign looked like to say, how are we going to get organized? Who are our partners going to be? How are we going to talk to the press? How are we going to think about this? And so you see document after document after document of planning and thinking through and figuring out, they even, I think they call it propaganda subcommittee. Like, how are we going to give our message forward in a way that people are going to really understand? So this particular document is from January 1978, and that was pretty much sort of the heart of when this group was active. So I really love documentation of activist organizations like this. We have a lot of it, and something that I find that it's really useful for is many people in their lives want to be active about some sort of a cause, and this is such a great opportunity to learn from the experts.
How did you come to have this here?
Yeah, this came to the repository, I think, about 20 years ago. This was based on relationships that we've built with activists throughout the United States so that folks know that this is a place where you can put your history.
It'll be safe.
And it'll be, trustworthy. That's exactly right. And that will make this history known and that it's valuable to us.
It's very interesting. Thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, so I When you asked for us to select our favorite item, I have to say that my favorite item is always what's in front of me at a given moment, because each object tells its own story. And to sort of pull one story out from the context that we have is quite a challenge. But I do have a favorite printed book, and I couldn't take this opportunity not to share it with you. So this is a copy of Micrographia from 1665. It was written by Robert Hooke, who was the first curator of experiments for the Royal Society in London. And it's a book about what you can do with a microscope. And this was a new technology at this period. And Robert Hooke was interested in sharing, it's almost like it's an advertisement for what you can do with technology, what you can do with a microscope, what you can learn. Unlike many of his colleagues in the Royal Society, he was not a wealthy man, and so he didn't go on all those journeys around the world learning about the natural history across the world. He was looking at what was going on in London itself. So that means that the things he was looking at were more the minutiae of life, and but what he did with it was he showed how beautiful it is. And he was a man who was both what we consider now a scientist, what they would consider a natural philosopher, but also a man of God. And so his interest was in showing how beautiful God's work could be. So if you're in London, 1665, one of the tiny creatures around you that you're going to be very used to constantly bugging you is a flea. So he takes this really obnoxious, horrifying creature that everyone hates, and he looks at it under the microscope, and he draws it with as much detail as possible, and then provides that drawing to an engraver, and he oversaw that engraving, so he was making sure it was as accurate as possible. He was really interested in accuracy. And then he included it in this book that he also wrote. So each section, there is a little bit on the creature or object that he's investigating, and then there are these beautiful fold-out plates. Some of the plates are not fold-out like this one, but one of the things I love about the fold-out plates, this one of the flea, and then I'll also show you the one of the louse, is that we're seeing these creatures that people were really unhappy about. Here's a louse grasping a strand of hair, so that connects to the hair book you saw earlier, perhaps. But it's at the scale of an elephant or a lion, and it's a louse, and it's a flea. So thinking about how he's elevating these creatures that people just found just infuriatingly annoying, but they're really beautiful to him, and because they're creatures of God. One of the things he does at the beginning here is he shows us what man-made objects look like in counterposition to what God's creatures look like. So you get the point of a pencil, you get a full stop, a period, a printed period, and a razor's edge, and you go deeper and deeper, and you look closer and closer, and it becomes uglier and uglier, misshapen, and you can see a period, printed period usually looks quite round and perfectly inked, but this looks like a great splotch of London dirt, he called it. So he's really exploring all of these things around him in this very detailed way. One of the things that we have to thank him for is the use of the word cell. When he was investigating cork, a piece of cork, he took a look at it under the microscope and thought it looked like a monastic living space, and so he said, "Oh, look at these cells," and that's how we got the term cell. So here's our cork cells right here.
Was he the first person to be using a microscope? Or
he was not.
Just kind of perfect?
He was not the first person to use a microscope. There were multiple people using them at the same time, but he was one of the first people to really write about it and show what you could do with it. at the same time, there were other microscopists that were at work, and they were sort of comparing notes and sharing drawings and letters across Europe. Van Leeuwenhoek, Malpighi, so various people in various parts of Europe, they were sharing information, but there was certainly some competition as well. One thing I want to show you as a book person, I really dislike seeing mold in books. However, here is a picture of book mold that I'm okay with seeing because it's an image. But it actually looks like a beautiful sort of almost Seussian forest, and it is just, you know, some mold that you might find on a book. So he's really investigating in a really deep and dense way. So
I've sold a lot of microscopes.
and you know, the funny thing is, he wasn't a manufacturer of microscopes. He really just wanted people to learn and investigate into the natural world using the technology available to them at the time. So that's why this is one of my favorite objects. I'm also going to just very quickly show you another book that I think is great. So I am really interested in books that are interactive, that give you a chance to use them and work with them. And this book is called the Cosmographia, and this is actually a Spanish edition. And it is from, let's see, 1548. And one of the things that I can show you in here that I just absolutely love are these basically paper machines called volvels. So you can use them to do some calculations, and they were often done for astronomical calculations. So the printer would print the initial circle and then print some additional pages with the different pieces, and then later the binder or the purchaser of the book would actually cut out those pieces and attach it themselves. So you get different things that they use to actually make the attachment. In this case, it's thread. It can be various other things like a pin, and then you can actually move the machine around. So it's a machine. A calculating machine from 1548. And there are a lot of books that do have volvels, and they're so much fun and interesting because you actually get to use them, and you get to make new knowledge as you're moving them around and calculating something. So it's something that is interactive, but also something that helps you learn more about the world around you. They also created on the page, on the reverse side, a space so that you could attach the volvel pieces on this side and then have underneath that the little bit of string, and then put this attachment on top of it so that you're not covering up any of the text. So they left that space open specifically for that to be there. So they were planning ahead and making sure that there was enough space for their machines to function. Yeah, it's really...
It looks like it's new.
It does, and
It's aged a bit.
yeah, and part of that is because the paper that we used in this period is made of linen rag, so it was actually the quality of the linen rag converted into this paper is really high. And then in the middle of the 19th century, we switched to wood pulp. And then, so you see 19th century, 20th century books that are in much worse condition because of the quality of the materials that were used. So this book is in great condition, and all of its colleagues are also in great condition because they're just high quality paper, and we've been able to keep them in really good conditions at Smith College. We have climate control, so we maintain a certain temperature and humidity, and that helps us keep them in good condition. And also, we turn off the lights when we're not in an area where we're paging something. So we really make sure that everything is well cared for.
It's just a beautiful book, beautiful binding.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's fun. Yes. So this is a vellum binding. So it's parchment, animal skin. This one is a more recent rebinding in leather that is emulating what it might have originally looked like, but it is a more contemporary version.
Thanks so much for sharing all this with us.
Yeah,
It's
thank
really beautiful
you.
stuff. Thank you.
So I have to third the comment of both Shannon and Maureen that when we as stewards are asked to bring out something really cool, we immediately stop because almost everything that we have we think is cool. That's why we're in, one of the reasons why we're in the jobs we are in. But in the College Archives collection, this fan by a student named Ethel Fifield, class of 1895, is really unique for a number of reasons. Primarily because it contains photographic images that we're assuming she or her friends took of themselves, of faculty members, and she cut them out. These happen to be cyanotypes, so the printed image is printed on what is more commonly known as blueprint paper. And so that's why it has the wonderful blue hue that it does. She decided, selected her images. She was curating her photographic collection, and she placed them on a fan, which she then also created all sorts of little leaves around. And more than likely, this image was placed on her room, one of her room's walls. What we see in the college archives with photographs of student rooms is that they contain a fantastic amount of photographs. Today everyone will pull out their phone and they'll take a look at they'll scroll through their photos on their iPhone or their Android. In 1890s and early 1900s, the students were plastering paper prints on their walls. And I wish if I had thought it through, I would have brought in an image like that to show you, to see how it was done. But this is a fantastic.
Do you know who these people are?
I know some of them. These are faculty members.
Oh, okay.
These are top, and then the more informal images of students are. I'm assuming they are her friends. The sad fact is that we don't have an identified image of Ethel, so I can't say to you, oh, and here is the creator of this wonderful fan. But what we do have in the class of 1895 records are group photographs of the women. I don't know if this...
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So this happens to be the class of 1895 in their first year. So for the mathematicians in the group, that is 1880, 90...
Not 1895, it'd be 1891.
1891. My colleagues are the mathematicians. So they are actually sitting in front of, this looks to be Hubbard House, which is still a student residence on campus. And just like today, when the first year students come in, they get their class photograph taken. That's what this is, just 100 plus years later. So the College Archives has a wonderful collection of group photos as well as the individual products that students can create. And what's really great about the photographic piece of the College Archives, particularly in this time period, this is the early phase of Kodak introducing the handheld camera. And when they created the first Brownie series of cameras, they were really targeting it and marketing it towards women because it was light, it had film already in it, and basically what you did, and as they said, is you snap the image, take 100 pictures, and then send it off, and they do the processing for you, return the prints as well as return a camera with film already in it for the next 100 images. And so Smith students were actively documenting every type of activity that they were engaging in throughout their time here. And also they took images where professional photographers couldn't go. They took them in their houses, in their student residences. They took them on their travels as students on Mountain Day to Hadley, to Amherst, to Mount Skinner, to Whately Glen, all over the place. And so simply by taking a look at the photographs that we have that are vernacular or self-made by the students, you can really get a good sense of what was going on in their
Had
lives.
some great postcards in your reference room
Yes.
over there that
Yeah.
are just the best. They really capture what it was like
Yeah.
to be
So-
at Smith
So
College.
it's in conjunction with all of the paper materials that we have in the archives, the photographic images just really can create a stronger story. And then these are also pieces that everything is connected in the college archives.